want you to take your Bibles and go to Isaiah 65. We'll finish up Isaiah 65 this evening. Isaiah chapter number 65. Dealing with the rebellious people of Israel. Again, the chapter started out with two groups of people. You have the rebellious people of Israel, those who God reached out to and they turned away from Him. And there are those that God had not reached out to. They were not His people. They were not called by His name, but yet they sought Him out anyways. And we began the chapter with the introduction of the church in chapter 65. And again, I've said many times that this might very well have been the message that got Isaiah killed. And we talked a little bit about what church tradition and even some Jewish traditional history said about how Isaiah died already. After that, he began to talk in verse number 8 about a seed that would come out of Jacob, and begins to introduce a particular remnant, but also he speaks of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. We saw a little bit later about in verse number 11, they that forsake the Lord, that forget my holy mountain, that prepare a table for that troop, and that furnish the drink offering unto that number. There's a particular group of these people amongst the Jews that had turned their heart against the Lord. And let's put it this way, if we go back to verse number 8, he uses a picture here. He says, as the new wine is found in the cluster, and one saith, destroy it not, for a blessing is in it, so will I do for my servant's sake, that I may not destroy them all. And he said, yes, there's some rotten ones, on the cluster of Israel. However, there are still some good ones. And so I won't destroy the whole thing. And when we look at verse 8 and verse 9, we see a good picture here given to us to understand that God is not going to destroy the Jewish people wholesale. That He does not desire to destroy them, set them off to the side. He has turned to the church, as He intimates here in the beginning of chapter 65, without using the term church, obviously, or even talking about a mystery, but he does talk about the people, the Gentiles, that turn to Him and hear His voice. But God will not destroy all of Israel. There were still some in there that would be faithful, the remnant. And for their sakes, He was not going to destroy the whole thing. We continue on, and he talks about what He's going to do to them. He says in verse 12, therefore I will number you to the sword. You shall bow down to the slaughter, because when I called, ye did not answer. And we talked about the difference between disobedience and refusing to respond to correction. It's one thing, as I mentioned last week, it's one thing to disobey or to break the law. And then it's another thing to refuse to respond to correction. When mom or dad try to correct you and you stiffen your neck, or as we talked about in the situation of the running from the police, it's one thing to break the speed limit. It's one thing to drive without a license, and it's another thing to flee from the police and to refuse to be corrected, to refuse to submit yourselves to that authority. And here we used that same kind of thinking here in these verses. He said in verse 14, though, verse 13, concerning those who are obedient, they're going to eat. The disobedient will be hungry. My servant shall drink. The disobedient shall be thirsty. My servant shall rejoice. The disobedient shall be ashamed. My servant shall sing for joy of heart, but ye shall cry for sorrow of heart. Then he begins to talk about the post-millennial reign of Christ. And that's what we finished talking about last Wednesday evening. We spent a deal of time here talking about eternity. What occurs, what goes on beyond the millennial reign of Jesus Christ with the new heaven, the new earth, and the new Jerusalem. And Isaiah here is speaking about that time period in these next few verses leading up to verse number 20. He said there, I create a new heaven, in verse 17, and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered, nor come in mind. And we talked about the significance of that. Not even remembering the previous universe, the previous earth, the previous lives that had gone on there. He says, but be glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem a rejoicing, and her people a joy. And again, he's talking about post-millennial reign. And I will rejoice in Jerusalem and joy in my people, and the voice of weeping shall be no more heard in her, nor the voice of crying. And again, that the information given to us in verse 19 lets us know that this is again post-millennial reign of Christ. Now we get to verse number 20, where we'll pick up tonight. Beginning of verse number 20, Isaiah is going to switch to a different time period. He has been here talking about eternity. Now he begins to talk about what occurs going on in the 1,000 years where Jesus Christ reigns. Look at verse number 20. We'll read all the way to the end of the chapter, to verse number 25, and then I will come back and talk about this. Verse number 20, it says this: "There shall be no more thence an infant of days, nor an old man that hath not filled his days. For the child shall die 100 years old, but the sinner, being 100 years old, shall be accursed. And they shall build houses and inhabit them. And they shall plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. And they shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. For as the days of a tree are the days of my people. And mine elect shall long enjoy the work of their hands. They shall not labor in vain, nor bring forth for trouble. For they are the seed of the blessed of the Lord, and their offspring with them. And it shall come to pass, that before they call, I will answer. And while they are yet speaking, I will hear. The wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and the lion shall eat straw like the bullock. And dust shall be the serpent's meat. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, saith the Lord." We go back here to verse number 20, and as we go through, you'll see and understand why I say that verse 20 through 25 is dealing with the 1,000-year millennial reign of Christ, not eternity like he was just previously dealing with. He says here, "There shall be no more thence an infant of days." He says, "For the child shall die 100 years old." So Isaiah here shifts gears. He begins to speak of the millennial earth, and during the millennial reign, when Jesus Christ comes to this planet that we are currently living on, but he lives, he exists, he stands and rules and reigns there in the city of Jerusalem, there are going to be some changes. It seems that the earth is going to be transformed biologically, ecologically, during the reign of Jesus Christ. It seems that people are going to live longer. Remember how they used to live for hundreds of years back before the flood? And it seems like that this is going to be the case when we get to the millennial reign of Jesus Christ as well. That the length of people's lives are going to get longer again. In the millennial earth, people are going to live so long that if somebody dies being 100 years old, people are going to think that person is accursed. We saw here in the verse. Oh man, they died young. They died at 100 years old, something must have gone wrong, or they must have sinned, or just like if somebody dies young, something bad must have happened. They had disease or something like that. And the millennial reign, it's going to be thought, well, they died at 100 years old, that's not good. Something happened. Something bad happened. It says also here, we see, biology is going to be different. But we also see, it says, they shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. So there's not only going to be the biological transformation, there's also going to be a social transformation. Now in America, for the most part, if I build a house, I expect to, Lord willing, to be able to live in that house. If I go out and plant a garden, I expect to, Lord willing, to be able to reap the fruit of that garden. I'm not concerned about somebody coming along and pushing me out of my house. I'm not concerned about somebody coming along and raiding my garden, except for whatever it is that keeps eating the tops off of my pepper plants and keeping those pepper buds from turning into peppers. Anyways, now that I've got that out there, I don't expect any armies to come through and raid, our farm fields or my gardens, because we live in a relatively controlled society. There's much that is not controlled. There certainly is much sin going on, of course, and law breaking. But compared to many other societies, and even during ancient times, there could have been roving bands of raiders that would have come along during harvest time and stolen what you just spent all spring, summer, and fall long, planting, growing, reaping, and then they come along and take it from you. Or you spend all this money and all this time building a house, and somebody comes along and it is taken from you. The whole village might be burned to the ground or taken from you. We don't live in that time period right now. At least you and I don't. Maybe there are places around the world today where they have to concern themselves. But there is going to be a social transformation here when there is perfect justice reigning over the earth. Let me ask you a question. Do you desire perfect justice? That's a question with a dual edge to it, isn't it? Perfect justice means you and I go to an eternity for hell. In hell, in a sense that if God had not sent His Son to pay for our sins, perfect justice demands that I go to an eternity for hell to pay for my sins. We want mercy and we want forgiveness. We want God's grace. We absolutely want those things. But when we're talking about our society, do we want perfect justice? Again, that's kind of a hard question to answer. Have you heard of zero tolerance policies? Zero tolerance policy means if you say this word or if you do this thing, there is zero tolerance. You will be fired or you will be imprisoned or whatever. No questions asked. There are no extenuating circumstances that we will consider. I just heard recently about a security guard. He was a black man, a security guard, and he had got called by the principal to come and help with an unruly student. And while he was trying to grab that unruly student and drag him out of the school, to kick them out of the school, that student was calling him names and was using the N-word and calling him over and over and over again. And the security guard kept saying, "Stop calling me that, stop calling me that, stop calling me that, stop calling me that." And one time he said, "Stop calling me," and then he said, the N-word, "Stop calling me that word." Well, he got reported. Somebody said the security guard said the N-word. Well, the school had a zero tolerance policy on that word. You say it, you're gone. If you're a teacher, you're fired. If you're a student, you're kicked out. That's it, end of story. No extenuating circumstances. Obviously, that seems unfair, from our perspective, and from what little bit of the story I heard, it seems unfair. Well, he ended up getting his job back because it was unfair. Zero tolerance policies sometimes make sense. Well, sometimes we want to consider the extenuating circumstances. Sometimes what's best for that young man is to go to the military rather than just being thrown in prison. Sometimes there are better alternatives, and a judge has the responsibility to be able to listen to both sides and to be able to not just say zero tolerance, this is what we always do every single time no matter what, but to consider the circumstances and try to do what's best for society and for that person and for the victims. To be able to best help that situation. Now, let me ask the question again. Do we want perfect justice? I'm not going to answer that question. I think ultimately in our hearts we want that. Perfect justice. What does perfect justice mean? We're going to later, not right now, but later this evening, we're going to look at some Old Testament scriptures that deal with how Jesus is going to rule during His millennial reign with an iron fist. And I want you to think about that. But we go back. Perfect justice reigning over the earth. Nobody is going to be robbed of the fruits of their labor. If you build a house, no one's going to steal it from you. You'll get to inhabit that house. You plant a vineyard, you'll get to harvest that, the cluster of grapes. You'll be able to turn it into wine. You'll be able to sell it for a profit. Now, it may not sound like much to us. Okay, I built a house and I got to live in it. We built the house I grew up in when I was 3. And I didn't have much to do with building it. I have a picture of me when I was 3 with my little plastic wheelbarrow when they were I guess they were seeding the lawn or something out there. And so I was, had my little plastic wheelbarrow and I was helping, at 3 years old. We drove by and saw the house while we were home in West Virginia this weekend. But I really didn't have any part in it. And we got to live in that house. And I lived in that house until I graduated, almost until I graduated from college. We had that house. It may not sound like much for us, but if you live during unjust times, and think about this, Isaiah is speaking to a group of people who are very soon going to be stripped of their homes, and very soon going to have all their belongings, even their freedom taken from them by the Babylonians, by the Assyrians. And he is speaking to a group of people who is about to lose it all, and here he promises a time off in the distance where simple justice, perfect justice is going to occur. One significant reason there is going to be such justice during the millennial reign is because Satan is going to be bound 1,000 years. Think about that. Think about how different the world would be today if Satan were bound in the bottomless pit right now. But he's not. He walks about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. He goes from, to be honest, I don't know what the devil does on a day-to-day basis. I don't know that he's ever been to, Verona, Virginia. He can only be in one place at a time. I don't know that he's ever heard my name or cared anything about what I did or said. But the devil is going to be removed. And when his influence is removed for 1,000 years, the earth is not going to be perfect. And I'll explain why I say that. During the 1,000-year reign of Christ, the earth is not going to be perfect, but it is going to be a whole lot better during that time when his influence is removed. This is why we're going to see such social change. I want you to hold your finger here and go to Revelation 20. Revelation 20. We're going to look at several different passages tonight. We only have 5 verses to cover, so I have several cross-references that I want to be able to go and look at tonight. Revelation 20, verse number 1, it says, "And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand, and he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil, and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that, he must be loosed a little season." And I think this is one of the, not only do we have Jesus as ruler, but then we also have the absence of Satan for 1,000 years. There's going to be a great change in society. I can't wait to see what that's like. It goes on to say, "They shall not labor in vain, nor bring forth for trouble, for they are the seed of the blessed of the Lord, and their offspring with them." There's going to be children born during that 1,000-year reign. This is another indication that what Isaiah is talking about here is the 1,000-year millennial reign and not the eternal state, the new earth, new heaven, new Jerusalem. It says in Matthew 22, verse number 30, it says, "For in the resurrection, that eternal state, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven." In our eternal state, we're not going to be marrying, and we're not going to be having children and procreating when we think about the new heaven and the new earth and the new Jerusalem. So if you don't want to be lonely in the new Jerusalem, you need to get busy populating, and building your family here, right? As they say, there's more than one way to build a church. But all of those who have been created, and I believe that includes all those who have been conceived, those will go into eternity. And we will, as we go into the eternal state, we'll be able to be with them in this new heaven and this new earth without a sea. Whatever that's going to look like, I don't think we're going to mind. I think we're going to love it, whatever it is. But during the millennial reign of Christ, there are going to be children being born. There are still going to be families. There are going to be, we're going to be there. I don't know exactly how we Christians fit into this equation, but there's also going to be those left over from the tribulation time. And they're going to be there. They're going to be, marrying and procreating and growing families and things like that as well. It says, we go on, it says, "And it shall come to pass that before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear." Let's think about this. We have the biological transformation, we have the social transformation, but there's also going to be a spiritual transformation during that 1,000-year reign of Christ. What do you mean by that, Pastor? There is going to be a unique intimacy with Christ that we have never had before, because we have not seen His face. We have not been able to physically, literally walk and talk with Him. But He's going to be present. Are there still going to be news stations and TV, during that time? Are we going to be able to whip out our smartphones and watch Jesus give an address from, the temple, the new temple in Jerusalem? I don't know. If after the Great Tribulation, we're still going to have that kind of an advanced society or not. But, it's amazing to think about. We're going to know Him. We're going to be able to see Him. We're going to be able to hear His voice. We're going to see Jesus deal with all of those day-to-day situations that Christians squabble about. Well, Jesus would have done this or said this. No, Jesus doesn't care about tattoos, and Jesus doesn't care about drinking, and Jesus doesn't care about smoking, and we're going to see Jesus deal with those literal day-to-day situations and see how He would handle those. It's going to be amazing. There's going to be an immediate and a constant sense of the presence of God. That's what he means here. Before they call, I will answer. I'll be there, I'll be in the midst of the problem, and before they even call, I'm going to know what the problem was, and I'll be there to deal with it. While they're yet speaking, I'm going to hear, because I'll be sitting there in the same room with my advisors as they speak up. I'll be sitting there, I'll be hearing. I don't know if he'll be reading the emails or what. I don't think Jesus would need to. I think he would know, because he is God, and he won't be limiting himself during the millennial reign like he limited himself during his life in the New Testament. His knowledge will cover the earth. If you just hold your finger here and go back to chapter 11. Isaiah chapter 11, verse number 9. Look what it says, and it's talking about the same time period here. Isaiah 11, verse number 9. It says, we see again the wolf and the lamb mentioned in verse number 6. The cow and the bear, the young ones lying together, the lion eating straw like an ox, the sucking child playing in the hole of the asp or the poisonous snake. Verse 9, it says, they shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. The earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord. What does this mean? Everybody is going to be aware and know who Jesus is. Many today don't. Despite how Christian we may think ourselves as a society, many in America today don't know anything about Jesus. Sometimes it is willingly. Sometimes it has been purposefully blocked from their eyes and ears by their parents, by their teachers. And sometimes it is just because nobody has been in their path yet to introduce them to this person, Jesus Christ. But that's not going to be like that during the millennial reign of Christ. There's not going to be a devil to cover up eyes and ears and try to stop the spread of the Word of God. But there is going to be a physical presence of God, of Jesus Christ here on this earth, and everyone is going to know about it. It doesn't mean, however, that everybody on the millennial earth is going to be saved. It just means that there is going to be an opportunity for a close relationship that can be widely enjoyed by everybody. We know that not everybody during that 1,000 years is going to be saved. Why? Well, turn over to Revelation 20, verse 7. How do we know that not everybody during that millennial reign is going to be a Christian or a believer? You'd say, how could you possibly stand on the same earth with Jesus Christ and not be a believer? Well, at the conclusion of that 1,000 years, Satan is going to be released from the bottomless pit. That chains are going to be broken. He is going to be released. And he is going to find many willing servants here on this earth. So during that 1,000 years, children are going to be born. And some are not going to believe. And when Satan gets here, he's going to find them. It says in chapter 20, verse number 7. Revelation 20, verse 7. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth, and compassed the camp of the saints about, and the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven, and devoured them. So Satan gathers them together to rebel against God. He still amazingly finds willing servants even then. And God destroys them. We also know that not everybody is saved during the millennial reign of Christ because of what it says in Zechariah 14. Hold your finger here. I know I say that a lot, don't I? Don't get too comfortable now. Zechariah chapter number 14. Like I said, I have several cross-references I want to go to this evening. Zechariah 14, beginning in verse number 16. This is going to describe the firm rule of Jesus Christ during the millennial reign. Zechariah 14, verse number 16 says this, And it shall come to pass that every one that is left of all the nations which come against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Pause. Okay, so if you have survived through the Great Tribulation, then what he's saying is, every year you are going to come and you're going to worship Jesus Christ, the King, the Lord of hosts, and you are going to come to Jerusalem and keep the Feast of Tabernacles. What happens if you don't? Verse 17, and it shall be that whoso will not come up of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. Well, that's very different than the way it operates today, isn't it? Today, Scripture tells us that God sends the rain upon the evil and the good. He allows the sun to shine upon the evil and the good. During the millennial reign of Christ, if you refuse to come and worship the Messiah, He's going to withhold the rain from you. It's an interesting read. Verse 18, he says, and if the family of Egypt go not up and come not, that have no rain, there shall be the plague, wherewith the Lord will smite the heathen that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This shall be the punishment of Egypt, and the punishment of all nations that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. In that day shall there be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto the Lord, and the pots in the Lord's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. We can stop reading there and go back to where we were. Again, we're given this idea here that during that time period, there's still going to be those, during the millennial reign of Christ, after His second coming, that are still going to reject Him at that time. And that's what Isaiah is dealing with here. Now, though not everybody is going to be saved during the millennial earth, during the millennial reign of Christ, it seems like the proportions are going to be reversed. Think about it. Matthew 22:14 says, for many are called, but few are chosen. Dealing with the church age. Matthew 7:13 and 14 say this, enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat, because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be to find it. Right now, during the church age, it would seem like darkness prevails. While the light is more powerful, it seems still that in our earth, darkness prevails, and strait is the gate, but broad is the way that most everybody is trying to travel. But we're instructed to go to that strait gate, and it said there in Matthew 22:14, for many are called, but few are chosen. However, in the millennial earth, it seems that there will be few who don't know the Lord and few who are not saved. Again, you have Satan removed. You have the presence of Jesus Christ. They have just gone through the Great Tribulation. They have just seen what an antichrist, what the devil's fake looks like. They have seen us, Jesus come in the Battle of Armageddon and destroy the armies of the world who were against Israel and who were against Jesus Christ. They've seen us, the saints who had been raptured away and are coming back with Jesus back to this earth. They have seen the amazing and powerful things that occurred during the tribulation, the miraculous things that occurred then and when Jesus came back. But there's no Satan there to blind them. There's no Satan there to deceive them during this time. Nevertheless, many will still choose not to believe. That, to me, is amazing. You and I, we chose to have faith in Jesus Christ here, with this faulty and failing flesh, on this earth in a society which is pervaded by darkness. But yet we still chose to believe and to receive that light. But during the millennial reign of Christ, it's going to be so much easier to believe and to understand. But yet, still, there are going to be some who reject it. I don't want to say that this is a comfort to me, but sometimes when you try to witness to people and they just won't have it, you begin to feel like you are inept, like you just haven't been saying something right, or you haven't prayed hard enough or tried hard enough, that it's your lack of faith or it's somehow your fault. Understand this, they even rejected Jesus when He came. In His own hometown, the Jews as a whole, they even rejected Him when He preached to them. And they will during the millennial reign, when the devil's not even present, many will reject Him. We continue on here. I said that in the millennial earth, there's going to be few who don't know the Lord and are not saved. And one of the reasons why it would seem that most know the Lord on the millennial earth is because, or let me rephrase that, why there are still some that choose not to believe is because they have come through that great tribulation time, and they populate this millennial earth, and their children don't believe. I don't understand exactly how that works, but we go on. He says, the wolf and the lamb shall feed together. Here's another transformation, an ecological transformation. The wolf and the lamb shall feed together. No more will the predators stalk their victims. Now the wolf and the lamb, they get along, they eat side by side. The lion is going to eat straw like a bullock. And the scientist says, impossible! How could you say such a thing? And those who have studied these animals say, that is impossible. Why would you're telling me that the nature of these animals is going to be permanently altered? They say, well, no, look at the lion's teeth. The lion's teeth are designed for tearing and ripping at flesh. The strength in their jaws are made for grabbing onto that animal by the neck and squeezing the life out of it until it stops breathing. What are those jaws going to do when it eats straw? Is it possible for God to completely change the natural order of the way animals eat? He made them to start with. It's not illogical or unreasonable to think that God can do that. Remember this. That's how it all started out anyways. Back in the Garden of Eden, the animals did get along. There was not predator and prey. What did the lion look like back then? I have no idea. There is what we would call microevolution. There is, animals change. We see the different species that have come over time, and this is, the idea of microevolution, a change within those species. The Bible does not teach macroevolution, the idea that a species changes, jumps species from one to another, because that is scientifically and literally impossible. A dog cannot mate with a cat and have cuppies or pittons or whatever you want to call them. It's literally impossible. Science somehow seems to neglect that idea when we see lizards becoming birds or birds becoming, anything else. That it is an impossibility. Is it probable that God can do this? Well, He says He's going to. I don't need scientific data to back it up. I don't need hard evidence to prove to me that there were creatures that existed back in the Garden of Eden, lions that ate grass only. You don't have to show me the skeleton or a fossil of a lion with a mouthful of grass in it for me to believe this. I believe it because the Bible says in multiple places that this is what it's going to be like during that time, and so I choose to just believe that. To get evidence, hey, that's a great blessing to be able to get evidence, but I don't require it. He goes on to say, they shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain. This is talking about Jerusalem. In all my holy mountains, saith the Lord. This is a glorious result of the transformation that happens here. So we see a biological difference, we see a spiritual difference, we see a social difference, we see an ecological difference. The Bible speaks very powerfully to other aspects of the millennial earth as well. However, there has been much confusion in church history over the millennial reign, the millennium. The church throughout history has often ignored or denied the promise of the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. The early church, all the way up till roughly the time of Augustine, accepted this literal reign of Christ. Tychonius in the late 300s, he was the first person to champion a spiritualized interpretation. So instead of a literal return of Jesus with His feet on this planet, ruling and reigning literally for 1,000 years, he chose to spiritualize it and saying, well, it's not like he's really going to come. He's just going to be spiritually in control. And that eventually became amillennialism. Amillennialism is this idea that, I'm going to come back to that. Augustine, because of what he wrote, the Roman Catholic Church adopted this view, as well as many Reformed theologians, the Calvinists, so to speak, the Reformed theologians, growing out of amillennialism, that there is no millennial reign of Christ. It's all spiritualized, and they do that to much of the book of Revelation. They spiritualize it. They don't take any of it literally. They just think, well, everything said in the book of Revelation is just a picture of something. And that's all there is to it. But out of amillennialism came postmillennialism. And what that means is this, that the millennium is going to happen in this church age before Jesus' second coming. That the church is going to bring it to pass. Some think that song, "And the darkness shall turn to dawning, and the dawning to noonday bright, and Christ's great kingdom shall come to earth, a kingdom of love and light," sounds kind of post-millennial to me. Now, I'm not sure. I haven't actually gone in to study the doctrine of the person who wrote it. But it sounds like the idea of the church and the world just gets better and better and better and better until Jesus is just kind of here. And that's the idea of post-millennialism, that the church is going to bring it to pass. But the clear teaching of the Bible is not amillennialism, no millennial reign, or post-millennialism, but what we call pre-millennialism. So, Shenandoah Baptist Church and Baptists in general, not all, but Baptists in general, we believe in pre-tribulational rapture. That is a rapture that occurs at the very beginning of the tribulation time period, the beginning of the 7 years. And we are also premillennialists, meaning that there'll be the 7 years tribulation, then Jesus Christ returns at the beginning, thus the pre part, at the beginning of the 1,000-year reign of Christ. And then there's this 1,000-year reign, followed by Satan's release. God destroys it, sends fire down, destroys Satan and all those he had deceived. Then heaven and earth are destroyed, and Jerusalem is destroyed, and there's a new heaven, new earth, a new Jerusalem. I know I say, I go through that general outline a lot of times, but it helps me to say it. As a teacher, I understood that, to say things out loud helps me to remember them, so I wanted my students to say things out loud, and maybe it would do good for you to say things like that out loud too, so that you can remember it. The teaching that Jesus Christ will return to earth before the millennial reign, that's premillennialism. He is to establish and to govern it directly. And in fact, there are more than 400 verses in more than 20 different passages in the Old Testament that deal with this time when Jesus literally rules and reigns. Think about that. 400 passages throughout Scriptures that deal with Jesus' literal reign here on this earth, personally, over planet Earth. I'm not going to go to all 400 of those passages. But David, it talks about it in Isaiah 55, in Jeremiah 30, Ezekiel 34 and 37, and Hosea 3. In fact, in those passages, it talks about David even having a prominent place there in the millennial earth. That's an interesting concept too, isn't it? David, Solomon, those guys, where will they be during that time? What will they be doing? There's also a blessing and security for the nation of Israel during that millennial reign. In Amos 9, there's a blessing that is given to them. The millennium is a time of purity and devotion toward God. Look at Zechariah 13. We were just there a little while ago. Zechariah shouldn't be too hard to find. Zechariah, unless you're standing in front of people and trying to find it, then it can be hard. Zechariah 13, verse number 1. And this is talking about, the millennial reign being a time of purity and devotion to God. It says in Zechariah 13:1, "In that day there shall be no fountain opened to the house of David and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem for sin and for uncleanness. And it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will cut off the names of the idols out of the land, and they shall no more be remembered. And also I will cause the prophets and the unclean spirits to pass out of the land. And it shall come to pass that when any shall yet prophesy, then his father and mother that begat him shall say unto him, Thou shalt not live, for thou speakest lies in the name of the Lord. And his father and mother that begat him shall thrust him through when he prophesieth. That's pretty serious right there. You stand up and you say that you're speaking for gods, and your own parents say, you can't do that. You cannot do that. You are lying. And it says they'll thrust him through. Verse 4, And it shall come to pass in that day that the prophet shall be ashamed, every one of his vision, when he hath prophesied. Neither shall they wear a rough garment to deceive, but he shall say, I am no prophet. I am a husbandman, for man taught me to keep cattle from my youth. And one shall say unto him, What are these wounds in thine hand? Then he shall answer, Those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, and against the man that is my fellow, saith the Lord of hosts. Smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered. And I will turn mine hand upon the little ones. And it shall come to pass that in all the land, saith the Lord, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left therein. And we read about that in the book of Revelation during the Great Tribulation, how a large portion of the earth is destroyed during that time. In verse 9 he says, And I will bring the third part through the fire, because this is the part that we're going to live on during the millennial reign. I'll bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, and I will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, It is my people, and they shall say, The Lord is my God. And so we see a time of purity and devotion to God there. Israel is going to be a prominent nation, and we've seen that throughout the book of Isaiah as well, talking about many foreigners coming to Jerusalem. And in fact, they can't even close the gates of the city at nighttime because there's so much gold and wealth being brought into the city, being things that are being brought to the Lord, and it becomes then for real and for good reasons, not for bad reasons like it is today. There's going to be a rebuilt temple and a restored temple service there in the millennial earth. Not that the Jewish people are going to require sacrifices, blood sacrifices to cover sins, but it almost seems more ceremonial at this point. But there's going to be a rebuilt temple and a restored temple service. The New Testament specifically promises a literal reign of Jesus. Look at Luke 1:32. Luke 1, verse number 32. So this is the New Testament specifically talking about the millennial reign of Jesus. Luke 1, verse number 32 says, He shall be great, and he shall be called the Son of the Highest. And the Lord God shall give unto him the throne of his father David, and he shall reign over the house of Jacob forever. And of his kingdom there shall be no end. The promise that was given to Mary and Joseph concerning their son. But then there's us. Many scriptures in Luke and Revelation, 1 Corinthians, dealing with us, the saints, being given responsibility there in the millennial earth, according to our faithful service. I don't know what all that means. I don't know what it is Freddie's going to be doing in the millennial earth. What kind of service is it that he is going to be providing? How is he going to be helping rule and reign? I don't have the answer to that question. Sin is not going to be prevalent, but it'll still be present during that time. There will still be those that reject. And Jesus will rule with a fist of iron. I asked earlier, do you want perfect justice? We will see what perfect justice looks like during the millennial reign of Christ. And when that is over, we won't have to worry about justice ever again, because we will be forever living in the new heaven and the new earth and the new Jerusalem in our eternal state with the Lord and with our brothers and sisters in Christ. And I can't wait to see that. We only have one chapter left now in the book of Isaiah, chapter 66, and there is still some more good stuff to come in that chapter. So don't close the book on me quite yet. We still got some good stuff to go in chapter 66.